Hi, I'm Minister Sean from Wayward One Ministries, and today we're going to have a belated Mother's Day. Now, Minister Terry was supposed to be the one, she had a great sermon prepared for you today, but unfortunately, she took a small fall. She's on the mend, and we are just going to go. I was just going to take over the duties for her today. I'll do my best. So, we are going to talk about Ruth and Naomi. So we're going to start in Ruth, and I'm going to pick it up in like verse 3. So we'll see how far we'll get today. This is going to be, I had to do this on pretty quick, so we'll see how this goes. And we'll start, like I said, in Ruth, verse 1, chapter 1, verse 3. And now many of you probably already have read this. This is a common, popular Mother's Day sermon. But I think I'm going to try to take this a little differently than some people do. So in verse 3 it starts, Now Elimelech, the husband of Naomi, died. So she was left alone with her two sons. They took Moabite wives for themselves. The name of one was Orpah, and the name of the other Ruth. They lived there for about 10 years. Then the two sons of Naomi also died. Naomi was left without her two sons and her husband. She got up with her daughter-in-law and returned to the land of Moab. For the land of Moab, she had heard that the Lord had visited his people by giving them food. She set out from their place where she had been with her two daughter-in-laws, and they went on their journey way to return to the land of Judah. Now, Naomi lived in the time of a great famine. It says it in verse 1:1. And Naomi was from Bethlehem, who she, with Elimelech, her husband, traveled to the land of Moab. Now, Moab is not a small journey. It is a very long journey. And the famine was bad, and many of the Israelites left their land, in search of better lands. And that's where they picked up. And now her two daughters-in-laws were Moabites. And this is very interesting in itself, because this would not have been a normal marriage for Israelites to ever marry Moabites. They were culturally different. They had many. They did not like each other. If you would go back, you will find out that many of the women with Moabite women at that period would seduce the Israelite men and have pagan rituals, and that was the custom. Now, not to go deep in it, but the Moabites were Lot's descendants. So, although that would make them cousins, they like I said, they did not like each other. So for them to marry those two women, to marry the sons, that was huge for them. And for Naomi, their mother-in-law, to accept those women was even a bigger deal. That would have never most likely been accepted in their homeland of Bethlehem. But the famine was so bad that they had traveled away, and there was none of their kinsmen to marry. So you pick up the story with first Naomi's husband passes, and then, which was bad enough, but then both sons pass in a very short term. So, and it picks it up. There was obviously no other children. The Naomi's two sons didn't have any children, so that left her with nothing. With the Israelite culture at the time, not having a male child heir to pass anything down to was bad. So, as you go along the story, we talk about how could they even interact, and like I said, they even got together. But they even formed a bond. This wasn't just like doing the best it is and they were what they were. These were two children, the two daughter-in-laws were accepted by Naomi to and loved by Naomi. And as the story says, if you go, we're going to drop down to verse 12. Turn back, my daughters, go, for I am too old to have a husband. Even if I thought that there was still hope for me, that I could have a husband tonight and give birth to sons, you see that they weren't even, she didn't even want them to go back. Naomi was going to travel back home to Bethlehem, back to her birthland, and which is in that time would have been an immense journey for a family, for a caravan, but for just three, what would have been just for the women to travel, just extremely dangerous. It is extremely dangerous for women to travel at that time. The distance traveled to Moab and back is immense. I Google searched it, so don't quote me as 100% accurate, but I believed that when I searched it, it came out like 1,800 kilometers. That is a journey in today's time, and that's crazy. That's like 1,200 miles. I don't. A quick calculation, but could you imagine that? That's not even a small. That's a major journey. We're from Ohio. We travel to Texas often. We go to like the Dallas-Fort Worth area, and that's 1,000 miles. Could you imagine just doing that in a time of famine? The journey alone could have killed them. Alone, robbers, bandits, and a lot of other unsavory characters at that time. So we drop down to verse 14. It says that then they raised their voices and wept aloud once more. The daughter-in-law kissed the mother-in-law, but Ruth clung to her. Naomi said, "Look, your sister-in-law has returned to her people, and you and her gods return with her." But Ruth said, "Do not urge me to leave you or turn back from following you. For wherever you go, I will go, and wherever you stay, I will stay. Your people shall be my people, and your God my God," which is very important. That in itself is huge because, as I stated at the beginning, the Moabites did not believe in God. They had idolatrous gods. They had many pagan gods, many pagan rituals. None of that would have ever been accepted in Judea, in Israelites' culture, Jewish culture at all during that time. So for them, this would have been huge for her to say that she accepts that God. And it goes on in 17, goes, "Where you die, I will die, and where I will be buried, may the Lord do thus to me, and worse, if anything but death separates you and me." So you see that the one daughter turned back and went back to her people. But Ruth stayed with Naomi and traveled back to Bethlehem with them. Just the two women. And you see that that's where I kind of want to spend some time today is if you think about this, that you're looking at a mother-in-law, not a mother-daughter, a mother-in-law of two different cultures. And you see Ruth, who had pagan gods, grew up in pagan gods, who married a Jew, for her to, one, like I said, take Ruth in. Naomi was showing a God kind of love, the love that God shows his people, and she passed that love on to Ruth. This was no small task for Naomi or Ruth. This was Naomi had to have passed down her beliefs to Naomi. this is a strong woman. This is an immensely strong woman. This was someone who accepted an extended family, accepted them in a strange land, and accepted her for who she was, and began to teach her about God. And this is no small task in itself. This would, like I said, this would never have happened in normal circumstances. And I take a look at mothers today, and the number of broken homes today is immense. It is so hard on my heart to see so many broken homes, so many failed marriages, so many kids without one parent or the other, either by choice or not by choice, that a parent has left. The incarceration numbers are high. The drug addict numbers are immense. There are so many mothers out there today that are raising their children by themselves and accepting in a way the role that Naomi has accepted Ruth. That she accepted Ruth and started to teach Ruth and teach Ruth about God and how great God was and the things that God could do for him. And I look back in my life, and I grew up with a mother. My mother passed when I was very young. So I didn't have a mother. I had my grandmother, who spent a lot of time, I spent a great amount of time when I was wee little learning from. And that is she took on that role. She took on that role as a mother, even though she was my grandmother, and raised me in the church, raised me to believe in God, to believe in Jesus Christ, and to have that strength to not only go to church every Sunday or to say God is good, but took that time to teach her children, teach her grandchildren, and about God's love and how to reciprocate that love of God. And as we get through this story, and I think back about the women in my life growing up, I had aunts that were very strong-willed, strong in faith, that helped guide me to where I am today. They may not know it. They may not believe every second of what they've done, but children look up to you. And for people like Naomi to raise, even though they were adult-ish age children, and take them into the home and to start teaching them at whatever age, whatever level, to continue that. And we have lost some of that. That the strong mother teaches those strong values to her children. And I know how tough today is. We're looking at great inflation today. We're looking at people now struggling to put food on the table, just like Naomi and her family did. And they traveled and they lost, and great death swept them. I'm sure you're probably looking at famine. They probably died of some disease, even though they didn't say. But if you take it, they died in very short term. So, the quickness of how fast everything changed in their life. And if you look at war-torn areas like Ukraine, these women are facing challenges, death of their children like that, and the death of their spouses, and they're doing the same thing. They're going to have to step up and be strong-willed in faith and strong in the love of God to teach their children that what they see in the world isn't what they're supposed to know, that the love of God is there for them. and and it and I have a special place in my heart for people who take on other people's children that are adopted, blended families, which is a very high percentage nowadays. That they love them children like their own children, and just like Naomi took in Ruth. But as we get back into the story here, we're in verse 19. So they both went on until they came to Bethlehem. When they came to Bethlehem, the whole town was stirred because of them. And the women asked, "Is this Naomi?" But she said to them, do not call me Naomi, call me Mara, because the Almighty has brought great bitterness to me. Now, you think that God did something bad there. No. When they arrived back, and first of all, for the people of Bethlehem to recognize who Naomi was after they had left, that means Elimelech, her husband, and Naomi were people of good standing inside the community. For them to be like, oh, Naomi's back, it caused a stir. So Naomi wasn't just a strong person in the land of Moab, but she and her husband were of strong-willed people, of people of stature in her hometown. And Mara means bitterness, but she doesn't mean that God put bitterness on her. It's God had, not God, that the circumstances around her life had created bitterness in her. Not that she felt that God gave her bitterness. So they got back home, and there's nothing left. They have nothing. Ruth and Naomi are poor. They have no money. They don't have no lands. They have no cattle, no herds, no nothing when they get back. They are as impoverished as they get. And so this is where Ruth goes out into the land, and I'm going to skip forward because the timing is I'm never going to get through this. As we look at it, and Ruth down in 2:2, Ruth the Moabite said to Naomi, "Please let me go into the field and glean among the heads of grain behind anyone in whose eyes I may find favor." Naomi said to her, "Go, my daughter." So she went to glean the fields behind the harvesters. She happened to come a part of the field belonging to Boaz, who was the clan of Elimelech. So most people don't know what gleaning is nowadays. So basically what happened is they harvest the fields in this time period. Anything that Levitical law states, anything that fell off, any of the seed that fell, the grain that fell to the ground, was to be left. It was not to be picked up. It was to be gleaned by the poor, by the ones that had no other means to feed themselves. So what would happen is the men would fall behind the harvesters and pick up the grain that had fallen, so they could feed themselves and feed their families. And this is what Naomi was doing. Now, for her to do that for Naomi, shows her Ruth's love for Naomi and how much she had done for Naomi and how much Naomi had done for Ruth. That their bond was so strong that they survived the travel, that they survived coming back. And it wasn't no small task for Ruth to walk in to Bethlehem as a Moabite. I'm sure that people talked. I'm sure that was the stir of the town, was that Naomi brought back this idolatrous woman that would have had no favor in the land. And And so for her to make that journey and to get that point where she's now gleaning, which is a hard day's work, you would have barely fed yourself by doing that, by picking up the grain off the ground. You would have, first of all, you would have been in a fight with the other poor people there doing the same thing you were doing. And then, I mean, you're picking up little pieces. You're not picking up whole sacks of it where you could just run around, scoop it into a sack. No, you would watch it fall off and you would pick it up and probably put it in your shirt or or a little satchel or something. So just so you could feed yourself. So you go down to verse 5. Then Boaz said to his servant, "Who was in charge of the harvesters? Whose young woman is this?" And this is it, because Boaz, being Elimelech's family, goes, "Who is this woman?" Because that would not have been a normal thing. And so the servant who was in charge of the harvester answered, "She is the young Moabite woman who came back with Naomi from the land of Moab. She said, 'Please let me glean and gather grain among the bundles behind the harvesters.' So she came and has remained from morning till now, through the rested a little while in the house." Then Boaz said to Ruth, "Listen, my daughter, do not go to glean in another field and leave this one. Stay close to my young women. Keep your eyes on the field in which they reap and follow after them. I have commanded the men not to touch you. When you are thirsty, go to the vessels and drink from what the young men have drawn." So Boaz was already showing favor to Naomi. This was, again, it was very dangerous for her to go to the field by herself as a woman. As you see, it says, "Do not touch." Have the men do not touch her. This is very. I don't have to. You can figure out why it was dangerous for her by herself in these fields at that time. She wasn't betrothed to nobody. She was nobody. She was a Moabite. She wasn't even she was a foreigner in the land. So for even Boaz to show kindness to her at any level was of great favor, and she did that because Boaz was kin to Elimelech, who was Naomi's husband. So she did a favor. He did a favor for Naomi. So and that'd been a hard day. You would have done it from when it was harvest season for them. They would have started immediately. They would have started in the morning, and they would have worked till dark. And this would have gone on during harvest season until it was over. So she was in that hot sun all day, picking up morsels of grain, just so her and Naomi wouldn't starve. Boaz, and you go down to 11, it says, Boaz answered and said to her, "I have been told all of that you have done for your mother-in-law after the death of your husband, and how you left your father and mother and your homeland to come to the people you did not know before. May the Lord reward your deeds. May you have full reward from the Lord and God of Israel, under whose wings you have come to take refuge." And we see that so many times today, in today's age, with the broken households, where divorce is high and many couples have remarried, where they have accepted their children. And I can't underscore enough just how important to me personally that you have shown favor and treated a child like they were your child. And we drop down to 15, verse 15. It says, "When she got up to glean, Boaz commanded his young men Let her glean even among the bundles. Do not harm her. Also, pull out some grain for her from the bundles and leave it so that she may glean it and not rebuke her. So she gleaned the field until evening. Then she beat out what she had gleaned, and what about an ephah of barley, which is about a half a bushel. So, and basically, to make it really short, what she would do, so after she picked up all that grain, she would rub that in her hand, and the barley, or the grain itself, would crack open, and they'd throw it in the air, and the shell, the husk of it, would blow off in the wind, and the grain would fall to the ground, and they would pick the grain up, and that was what was edible. So not only did you spend the whole day in that hot field picking up morsels, you then had to, you weren't done with the task. You still had a lot left to do. And that love that Ruth had for Naomi in that time, to take that time to feed both of them, is so important, and it's so strong, and it's that shows God's love. That shows how much love Naomi had shown Ruth to be able to do that. That Ruth was dedicated her life at that point in her life to making sure Naomi was taken care of. That was the most important. I mean, she could have easily have abandoned Naomi at any time and fed herself, and she didn't choose to. And that's what mothers do all the time nowadays with these blended families, is they show love, and they show respect for somebody else's children. And this goes and goes to extended families and extended children, that your neighbor's children, and not just that's family by some blood relation, that these families go every day and you see it, and they take care and feed other people's children, and take care of them. And this is for me, as it means so much for me, who didn't have a mother growing up, to see this, the strength when you see strong women that take care of them and show them the way, especially good solid Christian families, and not allow them to not fail to bring them up in a Christian household. They'll allow them to understand God's love for them, and pass that on, so that the household isn't broken, and there can be healing in that family. Now, as we go on, it goes, and I'm going to skip along here, but Ruth dropped to her feet, dropped to Boaz's feet, and thanked him immensely for doing what she was, to giving extra portions and taking care of her and Naomi. And so she did this to the end of harvest season, and carried on. And we're going to drop down to 3rd chapter of Ruth, 7th verse. And we talk about, we go in, and when Boaz had eaten and drunk from his heart and was merry, he went to lie down at the end of the heap of grain. Then Ruth came softly, uncovered his feet, and lay down. At midnight, the man was startled and rolled over, and there the woman lying at his feet. And he said, "Who are you?" And she said, "I am Ruth, your maidservant. Spread your cloak over me, for you are a redeeming kinsman." Now, a redeeming kinsman in that time was the typical thing when a brother would have died, a son would have died, another son would have married that daughter, that child. So there was still an heir to the household. So a redeeming kinsman would have been somebody next in line that would have picked up and married, so the lands, so they, so there was something left. So there was an heir to the land. And he said, "May you bless the Lord, my daughter. You have shown your act of kindness to the greater than the first, because you have not pursued young men, whether poor or rich. So now, my daughter, do not worry. All that you ask, I will do for you. All my fellow townsmen know that you are the woman of noble character. Now it is true that I am a redeeming kinsman, yet there is another closer than I am. Stay here tonight, and in the morning, if he wants to redeem you, very well, let him do so. Yet if he does not want to redeem you, then I will redeem you. I will, as the Lord lives, sleep here until morning." So she laid it. So as I skip through this a little bit, basically Naomi told her at the end of season, go lay at the man's feet and ask. Basically ask. Ruth was at that point asking Boaz to marry her. And of course that would never have happened in that time. A woman would never have dared been so bold. But Naomi, sensing what was happening, kind of pushed it along a little bit. And this is the wisdom. This is the wisdom of mothers. This is part of why on Mother's Day we take one special moment when it should be every day. We take a moment to thank your mother or the woman that raised you, if it was your blood or not, and take that, having that knowledge that they have as mothers, and that strength and wisdom to see what's going on, and to pass that knowledge on and say, "Hey, look, I see what's going on here. We need to have. We're just gonna push it along a little bit and help out just a little bit." He's for him to have not been married in that time frame is very odd. For him to not been married, not to have any children yet, especially being of wealth and a wealthy landowner. Particularly sometimes in that time period, something may have been wrong with him. Maybe a small physical ailment, handicap, something that other women would have seen as a mark against the man not to marry that man. So for him to have not been married, not to have heirs by this time, is in itself at least an oddity. That he had wealth and yet had no wives, no offspring, nobody to pass down the lineage. And forgive me there, I thought I had a cough. For him to have that land by himself is definitely different and unusual for the time period. And it doesn't say, nowhere in this story does it say he was ever married before or there was any other family that he had. So he went on. So the next morning comes along, and after by laying at his feet, she basically proposed. And he accepted that proposal. So, as he said, there was another redeemer. That means there was somebody, a kinsman that was closer, a blood relative that was closer to him, to Naomi, than him. So he went to find that person the next morning. Now, I'm going to skip a little bit because Boaz basically gave a whole bunch of grain to her that next morning, and sent her on way home to Naomi, which my personal take of that was probably a dowry of some sort given to Naomi as for accepting the daughter-in-law. So in 4:2, then Boaz took 10 men from the elders of the town and said, "Sit here." So they sat down. He said to the Redeemer, "Naomi, who has come back from the land of Moab, must sell the plot of land belonging to our brother Elimelech. I thought I should inform you and say, buy it in the presence of those sitting here and in the presence of the elders of my people. If you want to redeem it, redeem it." Now, Boaz went off the next morning and found the closest kinsman. Okay, now in that time period, you would have found 10 elders of the town and brought them in, and they would have oversaw the negotiations of sorts for buying Ruth, which is buying the land, buying everything that was owned by Naomi, because Naomi could not own the land by herself. So when Elimelech left, they left land. Most likely what had happened is they sold it. Now in that time span, nothing was really for sale forever. In Jewish culture, it would have been more of a lease. Okay? So Elimelech, when he decided he was going to go to Moab to find better land, find better area for cattle, he would have sold his land to whoever he sold it to. Okay? And then in up to 7 years, that person would have owned that land. And then a year of Jubilee, either he would have bought that land back by then, or it was given back to him. That way, the land never left the lineage. So, basically what they're having a negotiation about at this point is the negotiation of that land. By marrying Ruth, you now also take on the land that Elimelech had. And that measure would have went to Naomi. So they sat down, and as they sat down and they discussed this, he tells him to redeem it. And at first he says, "I'll redeem it." It does not say who the other person was, if it was a brother or a cousin, a closer. All we know is it was a closer relative. And he says, "I will redeem it." But he says then if you drop to 5, says, Boaz said, "On the day you buy the field from the hand of Naomi, you also acquire Ruth the Moabitess, the wife of the deceased, to perpetuate the name of the deceased through his inheritance." The Redeemer replied, "I am not able to redeem it for myself, lest I ruin my own inheritance. Take my redemption rights for yourself, for I cannot do it." So basically, he wanted the land, but he couldn't take Ruth. For whatever that reason was, he wasn't allowed by cultural law to take Ruth. So Boaz at that point says, I accept. And he takes Ruth as his wife. And becomes, and of course then at that point, buys the land of Naomi through Elimelech's land, which is Naomi's land. And as you go, we skip to 4:13. So Boaz took Ruth, and she became his wife. And they became together. The Lord enabled her to conceive, and she bore a son. Then the woman said to Naomi, "Blessed be the Lord, who has not left you without a redeemer. May he become famous in Israel, and he will be a comfort for your soul and support you in your old age. For your daughter-in-law, who loves you, and who is better to you than 7 sons, has given birth to him." And Naomi took the child, laid him on her lap, and became his nurse. The neighbor woman gave him a name, saying, "A son has been born to Naomi." And they named him Obed. And he was the father of Jesse, who was the father of David. Now why is that so important? That is the line of Jesus. So, as we look at this story, and it's a short story, I implore you to read it and take in the whole story itself, as I skipped along to conserve some time, because I'll speak for the and when I look at this story, and you see the strength of Ruth, and the strength of to be. I see two women. I see Naomi, who had the strength to accept Ruth. To teach Ruth. To teach Ruth to be a God-fearing woman. To accept her and love Ruth for who she was. To care enough to teach Ruth. And enough to care for her and love her so strongly that Ruth would rather have walked back to Bethlehem as they did, risking death. There was no guarantee she was going to make it back. None. That treacherous journey in itself is a story. The love for the two women had for each other, and it just to make that trip back. And and I skipped over the part, and it is early on in it, and the whole reason that Naomi wanted to go back because she had heard of the good works of God in Bethlehem. So that level of faith to say, I have nothing left. I may starve for the journey. I may not make it back. I may meet my end by robbers beforehand. Shows just the high level of faith in God that Naomi had. Now Ruth was so strong and loved Naomi so much that she took that risk together. And then to take care of Naomi when she got there, when she could have started, took the grain on the ground for herself and never returned at any point during the whole season of harvest, and make sure that Naomi was taken care of and then taken care of afterwards is to me shows what motherhood is. And I wrote a few things down, and I wrote, when I start thinking about Naomi, it says, a mother-in-law who traveled 1,800 miles to go home, where she had heard that God had done great things for her people. Her faith led her home with the belief that God would do great things for her and her family. She was right. But without Ruth, they would never have met Boaz and fulfilled her calling, which is to continue the line that became Jesus' line, And for Ruth, a daughter-in-law who had great loyalty to Naomi, she chose not to go home to her lineage, but followed Naomi's faith to Bethlehem. What deep love and faith in Naomi to risk her life for her mother-in-law. She took a huge risk and was rewarded greatly for her loyalty, sacrifice, and courage to stay the course. Through her faith, she ended up bearing a son that continued to the direct line of Jesus. These were two mothers that were not even blood relatives, but truly embodied what mothers do for their families. They sacrifice themselves. They provide provisions for their family. Most importantly, they showed their faith in God to see them through, knowing He would provide for them. And as I think back to my family, and to my grandmother and my aunt, who early on, basically, my grandmother's my mother. That's just me. That's what I come from. She took me in, and after my mother had passed, and when everything was a train wreck, stood as a strong Christian woman who, through her faith, set in motion the things that 30 years later where I am now. And that is if I can pass that on to others and see that the mothers today who have broken homes, that are raising their children, that go to church on Sunday and still struggle to make sure they come from a Christian household and have not walked away from Jesus, have not walked away from God. That is when you thank your mother. That's why you thank your mother. And for the mothers out there that are watching this, whatever year they're watching this, or this is after Mother's Day, to remember that when things are bleak and at the worst of times, that God is still here. And God will be here for you from now to the ends of time for you. And when you think you can't get up in the morning, you can. God's there for you. And I just personally want to say thank you. God bless you. And may God's provision and love for you be shown and be shown to your children and your children's children. Be blessed.